ISO FileMaker Magazine, the professional's resource for FileMaker know-how.
Hey there, this is Matt Petrowski for ISO FileMaker Magazine. Welcome back to yet another FileMaker tutorial video where we are going to learn more about FileMaker Pro. In this video tutorial, we're taking a look at some complex conditional formatting, and we've got a really unique file that we're going to use. Let's head over to my desktop and take a look at the file. Alright, thanks for joining me here on my desktop. The file that we have right here is something that I whipped up in about 2.5 hours in order to solve simply a problem for myself. Now, recently I partook of a survey, and that survey, in my opinion, really it's designed to gather data, but sometimes gathering the data, if you can help the end user work with and evaluate their own data, it makes the survey that much more useful. Now, here was the problem. The problem was the survey outlined what you needed to do, exactly what we have right here in our steps 1 through 3, but it did it with a lot of text. It was extremely text heavy, and the survey started off by saying it was only 5 to 10 minutes. That is not true. Any type of time investment where you have to parse through a lot of things that are completely unknown to you requires not only you to read and then comprehend, but then evaluate how that's going to fit into your worldview and what the decisions are that you want to make. So ultimately, this survey, while it says 5 to 10 minutes, was probably a 30 to 45 minute survey. Now, the survey impacts me personally, and actually impacts you. I'm not going to point to the original survey. It was requested that I not do that at this point in time, but it was more or less about features, new features in FileMaker. So I made up my own, and I'm providing to you this file that you can access over at FileMakerMagazine.com. This video is going to be free, and let me show you what the survey essentially does. Just like you've already been staring at on screen. First, it is select out of 14 different items, select a maximum of 5 of them that are important to you. Now, first you need to understand what they're about. Now, initially, each item had a really long title, and humans really like to get to it. They're impatient. They get to the point really quick. So what I did is I created a short name version of what the long name was so that you have an immediate reference. Why do people use acronyms? Because it's easy. So regex. Just the word regex could have been used without putting the word support. Cloud backup, add-ons update, security revision, revised themes. These are all very simple, easy to understand things. And then if you want to elaborate on those, you will have a further explanation. So here we've got the click the eye icon. So my intention was give a user the simple. Give them the simple, and then let them explore the complex. So by clicking on the eye, you would have a much more complex feature here. So it would be integrate AI would be something like integration of modern AI, editor features. And then you have a description with a lot more text here. And so you can put your paragraphs as much as you want right here in order to clarify what the actual feature is. But ultimately, in the UI or in the form, the presentation should be as simple as possible. And so I broke that down to instructions and then items, and that's it. Humans, once you get past 3 items, things really start to break down. Now, that also applies to our selection process here. Out of all of these items, if I was to rank all of them, I can do that up to 14. And in this particular case, working with 5, it's great, but we need to provide a way for users to not do the wrong thing. And we want to prevent it. Now, there's multiple ways in FileMaker, and one of the easiest ways is conditional formatting. So you'll see that there's nothing else on screen, and we're going to be watching down here at the bottom. You do not need to confuse a user with things that don't apply until they do. So note that when I make a selection, I follow my first rule, apply 1 through 5, and I'm going to say, okay, reusable layouts is really important to me. I'm going to select 1. Now my UI has changed. I have now provided more on screen to provide clues about what is going on. Now, when it comes to my conditional formatting, I had to account for this. And this is a fundamental that you need to deal with in your UI in FileMaker or any other software. You need to deal with what does the state look like when there's nothing, and then what does the state look like when there is something, and when there is something, how does a state change affect what should be shown? So here you can see what I did is I opted to go with orange just as an indicator. Now I did not provide a key of what the orange means, but I did provide a key that we can see down here in the bottom, remaining points, exceeding points. So let's take this off. Let's clear it. That's also another nice feature, that clear right there, because what we want to do is on this rank, number one, we want to limit it to the total number possible of options. And in this particular case of this survey, we want to limit it down to 5. Now, I wanted to be able to, in this survey, be able to rank all of these items, all 14. I wanted to be able to say, I want this one to be 1, this one to be 2, 3, 4, 5. Once I get to 5, which my list no longer shows, I also want to be able to go 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, all the way down to 14, just to look at how I would actually rank them. And that's because you're going to see what's coming up here is the visual that helps me out as the survey taker to see where am I applying a level of importance. So here we have number 2. It is using a maximum of 100 points. We're working with 100% here that needs to get distributed. So this adds on a level of complexity. First, I need to rank what's important to me. Then I need to say, out of what's important to me, let's give those a weighted value. Then I actually need to capture the data. Now in FileMaker, you're able to capture the data right here, but this was using a survey that is online using a different method for capturing that data. So I'm just going to rank a couple of them here. I'm going to say reusable layouts. I'll say revised themes. I'll say security revision of 3. And what we're looking for is when we get to what satisfies the actual conditions. In other words, we need to give the user a clue that we've met all of these things. So, and we'll do SQL CRUD. As soon as I select 5, notice that I take the conditional formatting off. Now over here we have this blank, and I probably would revise this. There's always tweaking you can do to your solution. Essentially, what we want to do is show just a simple pie chart. So in reusable layouts, I've got 100 points that I'm going to be able to do. So I'll assign 40. So now I'm using my key. My key is saying I've got remaining points available. Now, according to the survey, I took the instructions off of the screen now, and it shows that I have 40. Well, having read the instructions, it's very easy for me to remember that I had 100 available. So what I'm going to do is use my conventional colors. Yellow for a warning, and then red for an error. So if I go and I apply all of my colors here, I can obviously look down at the bottom and say, oh, I've got 30 more to go. So I'll go 10, 10, and 10. And this is what I want to see, this chart. I want to see visually how I am weighting things. Now, the original survey was basically just all boxes. It was boxes and numbers, boxes and numbers. Humans are horrendously bad at evaluating out of a collection of numbers. Once you go past 3, 4, maybe 5, even 5 is difficult in order to visually understand and get a sense of what is the weight of these values. But FileMaker and many other technologies, web technologies, use the web viewer if you want, provide you with an extremely nice way to understand what's going on. Now I look at this chart and I say, wow, am I really giving reusable layouts that much? I actually think that integrating AI is a little bit more important, so I'm going to bump that up to 20. Well, now I'm over the limit. Clearly I've used conditional formatting in order to do that, and I'm at 110. I can see that. Where am I going to take points from? Well, I can reduce these to 5 and 5. And get back to my results and say, yeah, that's actually more accurate. I do want to give SQL that much more of a weight. So what we're going to do in the remainder of this video is the conditional formatting that is on both of these columns is somewhat complex. In fact, a lot of your conditional formatting and how you use it, the way that FileMaker implements it, is super simple in terms of it's usually greater than, less than, within this range, but it is not complex conditional formatting. You need to also provide conditional formatting that accounts for user error. Now, in this scenario, I have a ranking that I must go 1 through 5, no more, no less, and no duplicates. But users will do that. Users will accidentally come in and say, oh, I want this one to be 3. Okay, I've given all. If without this conditional formatting right here, it would be very easy for the user to then go take this data and submit. So we are going to break down the conditional formatting and how we actually take a look at this, address the when values are empty, but then also when values are full, and what are the conditions, and how do we combine them into a FileMaker calculation that makes our conditional formatting work the way that it should. So you find yourself asking the question, where should you host your FileMaker solution? Well, one of those dots right there. That's what I would pick. Now, they didn't come to me. I went to them, and I trust fmcloud.fm with all of my data. They are using the latest tech. In fact, did you know Claris is actually, in some instances, releasing features first and only for Linux. What does fmcloud.fm use? They use Linux. On top of that, they use containerization. And if you've not heard about containerization, then you will be. It's one of the best ways to host your FileMaker solution. I highly suggest that you check out fmcloud.fm. All right, so there are a lot of things in this file that make it work the way that it should. There's so many nuances in FileMaker that if you really want a file that's efficient and also works to prevent users from making errors, there's just so many little things that you need to know. For example, let's start off with the record count. In this file, I need to show all 14 records. I have a graph. We go into layout mode, and there's the graph right there. I also have my instructions, so there's 2 different objects that are selected. I'm going to interchangeably show those. I am going to show the graph when there is data that the graph should show, and I'm going to show the instructions when there's no data for the graph to use. So in this scenario, what ends up happening when you create a solution is you end up seeing a lot of the same things. So in the spirit of dry, what I'm going to suggest is when you start to see the same thing over and over and over and over again, take the time and just create a custom function if you want to. Some developers don't like to have custom functions that are part of the logic of their solution. I don't know why this is the case, but for me, custom functions are just a place to hold code that's universally available. Here's why. The hide condition for the instructions, yep, that's what I have selected right now, has this one thing that says list features ranking to what is the rank. And it has this is empty. Well, let's go take a look at the features rank on the other side. Anything look familiar? Features ranking to rank list is empty. That is the exact same thing. The only thing that is different was a switch of not. Now, what I'm going to see is in a lot of other areas in this solution, this appears a lot of the time, and this wrapped around it basically determine do we have data in order to show the chart, or do we not have data? That actually applies to the conditional formatting that we have over on the fields just as much as it does here. So what did I do? After I saw that, I went in and created a custom function called no rankings applied. Just something that's easily human readable, and it literally has context-based data within the custom function. Now, I don't personally have a problem with this. If you have a problem with this because you think it's obscure, because the name of the custom function doesn't say anything about the context that it's operating in, which in this case is this context. It is a table occurrence in this file, which if we take a look quickly, this solution really is nothing. It is nothing other than a Cartesian join. In other words, the layout that we are on simply needs to show all other items from the same table. It is a self-relationship. This is features ranking. There's only one table. This is features ranking. So if you're not familiar, this relationship, a Cartesian join right there, simply says, show me all of everything on the other side of this relationship, which in this case is literally everything. Now, we're going to have a secondary issue that deals with the chart. We'll address that with regards to what needs to show, and I'll show you a nice little feature of being able to enforce something. But if we were to do this right here and just say no rankings applied, and copy that, and then just come over to the other object of the instructions, and then this one is the opposite of not no rankings, we should get, which doesn't read well, not no rankings, but the logic is sound. As soon as I actually apply one, I get the switch that I want between those two things using that one custom function, and as we'll see, that one custom function will also apply to our conditional formatting. So, what is the situation with regards to the chart? The chart has a unique aspect that with some FileMaker data, when you use a FileMaker chart, which I'll bring it up right now, and we will set this to, down at the bottom there is this use actual data, which will use the fields that you have referenced, or you can use your sample data. If I use sample data, I can at least see what the formatting of my chart is. The chart itself, when we expand this, we can see that I am using for the labels the short name that I referenced, not the long convoluted name, and the data that's being used in order to render this chart are the points that are being applied. And now what we want to do is when this data is sorted, there is a problem that if I was to go into sort mode and then sort this data by this particular value, actually, let's take a look at this. Let's get some data. I'll go 1, 3, 4 here. We'll select this one, 5. And just to make sure that we're not seeing anything, we'll go 30, 20, 10, 10, and then we'll go, I've got that. That's 120 over, so we'll go 30 right there. All right. Watch what happens when I sort this data. Let's sort the data by rank. Notice that something happened with my chart there. Also, if I have records taken out of this, I can't actually take records out of this. You notice that there's a lot of jumping around here with regards to what is happening. And so here's the trick. Notice that what I'm hitting, the keyboard shortcut I'm hitting is Control or Command T. I am attempting to remove a record from this found set. I cannot. I could delete a record, and that would actually reduce, which you can prevent the deletion with your privilege set. But in this case, if we look at the script triggers for the layout, we can do that from going up to the layout setup. We can go to the script triggers there. I'm using an on record load, and I'm tied to a script called unsort. Now, if you need to maintain a fixed set of data, meaning once you have load a found set, and then you want to maintain that based on what the user does within the found set, the on-record load provides a unique opportunity to control that. The on-record load script trigger says that you can, when a record loads, do something. Now, you're not just thinking about when you move on to a new record and that record loads. A byproduct of deleting a record means that once that record is deleted, the record that comes in is a record that loads, so that script trigger will work. Likewise, if I omit a record or take it out of the found set, well, I'm no longer on that record, I'm going on to a new record, and I now have to use the on-record load. Well, if we take a look at that script in particular, the unsort, you can see that I'm basically just rewinding whatever it is that you did. If you tried to omit a record, take it out of the found set, I am immediately saying, as a result of that, because of the on-record load, I'm now going to show all records, and you cannot omit a record. So this is just a nice little trick, and in order to keep the chart actually rendering properly, I'm unsorting the records. Because FileMaker, some charts in FileMaker, they need the data in the unsorted order in order to use that the way that it is going to be presented. So that's another nuance that I had to find or to basically deal with. Remember, though, if I add a new record, which I just did, and here is the record right there, it is a blank record. This database does not prevent you from adding new records or removing records. You can prevent that, again, with the privilege set. You can say, on this particular table, no new records and no deletions can actually happen, and then I'm not worried about that. So more or less in this video, if you haven't got the sense, let's make sure we're on that record. I will delete this record. We'll delete it, but nothing happens to my chart. It stays the same. It's still using the same data. And every time that I'm going deleting new, whatever, anytime that on record load fires, it is showing all records and unsorting, putting me back in the state that I want to enforce. All right, now let's move on to the conditional formatting. The complex conditional formatting is something that you need to take into account in order to break things down at a level that makes it easy for you to figure out. In other words, break it down into its individual pieces, solving them one at a time, and then create your complex conditional formatting and put it into sometimes an if condition or a case statement, as we will see. All right, let's take a look at our conditional formatting. We'll go into layout mode. We will select on this particular field, and we will go to our conditional formatting. We'll click on specify, and we will come into this, and we'll take a look at the complexity of it, which this isn't ultimately that complex. I have had conditional formatting statements where it is, line 1 and line 2 and line 3, and then you've got a parenthesis where you've got option 1 and option 2. This is when you're getting into a level of complexity that unless you get very clear with your data organization, your conditional formatting can be very difficult. So it's very important to clarify things as clearly as possible. That was very redundant. But what we have here is use a let statement when you need to clarify something such that the calculation logic can be explained with a much easier or more simple word. So what am I dealing with? I am dealing with the rank right here, and I called it simply values. Now, to be honest, once I have multiple, if I was dealing with 3 different sets of values, I am not going to necessarily have values, values, and values, because clearly once you've declared once, when you declare a second time, you're simply overriding or modifying whatever was previously declared. But what I'll do is once I hit a certain limit, if I've got more than 2 items, I tend to now say I need to further clarify this. So it becomes, instead of just the generic general values, it becomes rank values because I'm dealing with the rank field. So be as explicit as possible with the name of your variables. Otherwise, if it starts off simple, go generic, and just go with values. You know that you're able to say, okay, what are the values? Well, they're the rank values. That's pretty easy to associate. It's not a visual jump that's that far in terms of when you're scanning this code. The next thing is our sorted values. So here's the key that we have in this particular situation. Let me back off here and move my windows so that we can see. What we have is, this is a portal. This portal is going to get data based on however the user has classified it. Now, when we have put values 1 through 5 on different fields, those values are coming back via the list function in a completely different order. In other words, the values could come back as 5, 3, 2, 4, 1. Well, in order to make sure that I am getting 5 and only 5, what I've done on screen is exactly what I would want to compare against. I would want them in the order of 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. I literally want this exact sequence right here. And I want to compare it using the exact function. Now, the exact function is really, really pretty cool, but there's a nuance here that we need to know about. Any of FileMaker's quote-unquote values functions, if we use right values, if we use left values, anything that has the word values makes this assumption, and that assumption is this, that you are going to have the values of however many values there are, and look at my cursor that's flashing on screen, it appends a return. So there's two ways that you can deal with this. You can either attempt to remove this return by stripping it with your calculation logic, or you can simply just say what I'm going to compare against is going to be the same thing as what that function actually returns. So this sort values is taking my pure list right here, which may be the values of 5, 3, or whatever it is, 5, 3, 4, 2, 1. It's putting them in the order of, now it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but it's also going to have that extra return right there. So once we do that, we are going to then literally have those values be compared with the addition of the paragraph return, which is right here. So here's my strict enforcement. I am saying I'm going to give the exact function a list of numbers. It's going to look exactly like this with the addition of that return right there. In fact, this is a good way to know when things are giving a return within the data viewer, etc. Use your highlight. If I highlight and I do not have that extra return at the bottom, whereas right there I can, all of this additional blue from the highlight lets me know that there is a return trailing on the end of this. It's a very common thing to get caught up in when you're developing a FileMaker. So we take that list, we are going to concatenate an extra return, knowing that this, going into this variable, when these are exactly the same, this will then evaluate. Meaning, if you have exactly 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, not 1, 2, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Nope, exactly. Only 1, 1, only 1, 2, only 1, 3, 4, 5, and so on. That is when you are going to be valid. Now, because this is a conditional format that says I am going to apply the negative situation, we need to flip this positive expectation that these are exact. If they're not exact, meaning they're in the negative, then that's what we want. So that's where we have this or not, which can be confusing, but it's essentially how it works. Now, we also have something where we want to show the formatting when we're going to look at the maximum of the feature's rank, and we're going to say you can have no greater than 5. Now, we are allowing 5 in this. You can rank all 14 items if you want to. I just did that so that I could see what's going on. But the conditional formatting is going to come on when you exceed 5 and if it is not exact. Now, could I have done just this one particular line? Absolutely, I can. But maybe sometimes in your solution, maybe you want to have additional constraints. And that's what I put in here. Maybe you can go up to 7, but you also have to have exact. I think you get the idea that you are able to make this as complex as you want. Now, there's one other thing that I like to do here on screen. Anytime that I see the duplication right there, especially when it comes to fields, when I'm using a let function, I like to actually sprinkle these out, or not sprinkle them out, to refine them down to 1. So even though I did this really quickly, I would probably take the time and do this right here and actually say values is equal to that right there. Then I would say, wait, this is the list. I would then put this into values, and I would say if is empty list max feature values right there. And so you can see that what happens is, according to my syntax highlighting, This is a great way to go about this because it makes it such that if you revise the structure of your solution, I only have one field to change if I want to move it off of rank onto something else for some reason, what have you, and I don't have the field sprinkled throughout all of my conditional formatting. And hopefully that actually works out right there still for what I probably just broke it. I'll have to actually look at that. This is why you don't do things on the fly. But ultimately, what we have now is we have our second conditional formatting, which we're going to take a look at right now. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Actually, just before we do that, let's take a quick look. I forgot to mention over on this other one. Remember, there are the two conditions. Should there be conditional formatting when it's empty, and when there are values, what are my conditions? Well, that's all managed with the case statement. I don't know if you saw that right off the bat, but here we're saying if the values are empty, then false, we are not going to apply this conditional our conditional formatting. So in that particular scenario, this is when we have no values right there. And this should be otherwise. And this really is helpful to give yourself these easy to read types of comments. So case, when we have no values, false. Otherwise, show of formatting when max rank is greater than 5, or not exact sorted is equal to my exact list right there. So I think you get the idea. Next up, we have this conditional formatting. These are pretty easy. They are simply just using the get summary function, because all we're doing is we're simply taking a look at whether or not you are greater than or less than 100. So in this case, the get summary is looking at the summary of the total points. It's just a summary function. The break field is not different. We use the exact same field for the break field of the get summary function. And then on this one, we are simply just going to have a little bit more complex. And do you see, actually, this is not the same thing. This list features ranking 2 is on the points field, not on the rank. So I would not be able to necessarily use my no rankings applied custom function. But if I started to see this a lot more in my UI in multiple different places, that's when I actually create the custom function for that. In this particular case, we are just saying if the points is not empty, we're doing that by setting the not, and we have a get summary that is less than 100, then what we're going to do is for that particular one, we are simply going to make it yellow with the warning. Otherwise, we are going to have our complex summary right here. Now, when it comes to conditional formatting, it's important to know that there are certain circumstances where you will hit the same type of condition as conditional formatting is evaluated as it goes down. Knowing that you can drag these is important so that you can put them in the order that they need to be to get the result you want. Sometimes that's a matter of testing. It's basically last one wins, I believe, is what it is. So in other words, even though the first one may hit, if it gets to the next one and that one also hits, that's what's going to be applied when it comes to your conditional formatting. And you can always do that by trial and error, testing out to make sure that it does what you want it to do. All right, so from the standpoint of conditional formatting, I've covered what I want to cover in terms of the complexity. It more or less breaks down to using statements. Oh, why did I delete? Using statements that actually make it easier for you to understand, and in particular, using the case statement. You can have as many different conditions as you want, but remember, they all are going to have to evaluate. And what you want to do is typically you want to, as the first option, if it is the most common, put that one up at the top. Reason being is it doesn't have to go through 5 different things to ultimately get down to the default if the default is the most common result that's going to get kicked out. So if it makes sense, logic-wise, put the most common with the highest probability up at the top. Otherwise, your default down the bottom will catch everything. And clarify with let functions. Be as explicit as possible. Name things so that it reads well and it's easy to actually make sense of your conditional formatting. That's when this becomes a lot less hard when you're going to do your conditional formatting. So there we've got the conditional formatting, and like with all of my videos, I like to give you some additional insights into FileMaker. In this particular file, there's a couple of them, and one of them is this. When it comes to this portal or sorting records in a list view, when you have items that you're going to sort, so if we go into sort with Command or Control S, and if I sort based on rank, what FileMaker does is FileMaker chooses to sort empty records. There is no option. There's no checkbox here to say don't account for or exclude empty records. That's what I would like FileMaker to do for their sort feature, but there is not. There is only sort by rank, and what happens is FileMaker is going to sort all of the empty records up at the top. Then once it gets to the first record with 1, then 2, 3, 4, 5. That is a problem for me, because when we have that scenario, what would happen is all of these values would be down here at the bottom. And that would happen both on list view and in this portal, unless we solve the problem. Now, the way that we solve the problem, many times it's not ideal, because it would be nice if FileMaker provided the feature for us. In other words, if you have found a record with an empty value, just don't count it and sort everything up at the top. It really depends on the sorting algorithm that FileMaker is using. Maybe it's not possible, but we can solve this ourselves. Going into the defined database and looking at the fields, many times it's simply just a matter of adding something that allows you an additional level to control the sort. So in this particular case, we have a field that I added called rank populated. So in other words, if I want to determine whether or not this particular record does or does not have a rank, that's a Boolean situation there, it's a Boolean switch, I am going to make a number field, and then I'm going to use a calculated value that is simply just going to say, if the rank is empty, and I could have done this as a not versus I could have done it the either way. It could be is empty, and then I would just control the direction of my sort in the opposite of what I'm actually doing. I tend to think I love using the not myself. Some developers don't. They tend to think more in the positive. I tend to think, I guess, more in the negative. But it's easier for me, such that now if I was to sort this record, and from the outset, if that auto enter is on your fields, it's either going to be a 0 or a 1. And if I use that as my preemptive value to sort, it's going to give me all of my values up at the top, either list view or on the portal itself. So when we look at the portal and we double click, we can see that the portal is being sorted, and we specify that. You can see exactly what I just showed you with the rank populated. If I do this in a reverse order, and that's because I used the not, if it actually said is empty, I would actually be able to put this in the ascending order. So this switch right here, descending versus ascending, simply has to do with the value that I'm assigning when it does or does not have a value. You can always, always, always flip the logic. It just depends on how you like to program. Then I'm going to sort based on my rank. So this puts all of my values that do have values up at the top. Then I sort those, and that is exactly what I want as a result in the UI when the user is using this. Now, there's a couple other things that need to happen. One of them is an ease of use feature. When I first put this into practice, I had a normal field, which is just a regular entry field, for the selection for the ranking method right here. That's not ideal. If you want to limit the user to a certain number of options, then it's better for you to use either, as we look at it over here in the inspector, it's better to use either a drop-down list or a pop-up menu. Now, the pop-up menu forces the user to make a selection, and the pop-up menu comes with some benefits. The pop-up menu is a little bit unique compared to the drop-down list, because I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the on-object save does trigger merely because you made a selection. Whereas when you make a selection on the drop-down list, I don't know that the on-object save actually triggers. But we also have access to the on-object exit. Now you can see that there is a script trigger. It's that little star right there on this particular field. If we take a look at that and go to the script triggers, hopefully I'm not blocking that right there. I had started off using the on-object exit, meaning once you get out of this field, unless FileMaker commits the records, it doesn't always refresh the portal. And that's what I wanted to have happen. You make a selection, and then I want the portal to update and reflect that. Well, moving to the drop-down list allows me to let you assign as many different numbers as you want, meaning you can go beyond 5. This was for me because I wanted to rank all 14 and see where they lie, and also apply points to them if I was to, want to visually see that chart. But on the on-object modify, we have the script now. If we go take a look at that, and all I did is, because the solution is super simple, I didn't name the script specific to an area. I just named it the exact name of the function or the script trigger itself. That's just because I knew I was only going to have one. In this, there's a little bit of complexity. I'm going to let you walk through this with the debugger. The debugger is your best friend in FileMaker and all programming languages, such that when we have our file and when we make this solution, if I had the debugger and I brought that up and you made the selection, what you need to recognize is that FileMaker remembers that you were on this particular record or this particular row in the case of a portal. So we can, before we do anything else, capture our ID, capture our row, even though we may not be using it, then do exactly what we want. In this scenario, in this file, because it's a same file relationship using that Cartesian join, we are going to go to the related record. This loads the record that the user had just made a selection on, which makes sense. Then we commit. That's what's going to cause the data to update. Then we refresh that portal, which is going to cause it to resort. Actually, the commit alone did. You'd probably be able to turn that off and you still get the same result. Then we're going to go to the first result. Now, there is the active row. While I captured that, you would think in some scenarios when the portal doesn't necessarily change, but you just want the portal to update, you can many times use the same row, which I captured here. In this particular instance, the rows all shifted. Because I applied a rank and the sort then changes the row order, this is more or less not needed. So I have to use a loop that is going to target the record that the user was on after I did all of that reshuffling mumbo jumbo. That's what required me to capture the ID. I capture the ID, then I go to the portal row. I'm going to exit if I am ending up on the row that has the ID that I captured before I actually moved to a different record. And then finally, once I'm on that row, as a result of exiting the loop, which has a go to portal row, it's just going to the next, then we're actually just going to go to the field that we're now expecting input. And that's what that on object modify. Now, what we have is we also have a situation, and let's just go ahead and add these in, where I can add in 6. I can make this one 7. I can make this one, I want 8. This is why I did a drop-down list instead of a menu. I wanted to be able to do this just for myself, just to see where I would actually rank things out, even though I get the conditional formatting. And what happened there? Oh, I'm not getting my 11 in there. And it's also not going to show because that's not wide enough. Let's drag that out, and we'll shift this over a little bit right there. The 11. So I want you to be able to see this. I'll mess up my layout for a particular reason, because there's one additional thing that I want to show you in this particular database. I am entering in manually these values that allow me to control via a validation method the ability to get these such that I can never have more than, what do I have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I forgot 10 right there. So watch what happens when I enter 15. It jumped me because of that, but let's go with 5. Notice that I cannot get 15 into that field. In other words, if you want to enforce constraints on the user so that they absolutely cannot make a mistake, you can do that clearly with auto enter. So let's put this at 10, what it is. Gosh, that's triggering because it's got the onObject modify, which is the result of my trigger. Again, I would not use the onObject modify with this drop-down list if I wanted to allow the user to type in the values. I would move it from the onObject modify to the onObject exit. And that's because as soon as I get out of this, then I would be able to move to that. Otherwise, as soon as any change happens to this, any modification, if I type the first value, like the 1 out of 10, it's already moved me to the other field because it ran my script trigger. So again, this was only designed for the 1 through 5. But that also leads me to this right here, which is pretty cool, this clear. What's nice about this is you get a benefit with FileMaker if you put a constraint on your field with auto enter. This clear does not do anything. There's no script trigger. As we saw, the only script trigger on this field is the onObject modify. And the onObject modify script, as we just saw, is not looking for a value of clear. So what happens is, even though in my value list, I have my allowed values plus a separator plus the word clear, it is the field itself. The rank field is saying, I will only ever accept the values of 1 through 14. That's it. And so when I make select clear, the bonus that I get is that it just wipes it out. It just removes that and doesn't even allow it to go into the field. And when we take a look at the rank itself, of course, we have an auto enter on this. And just for the sake of clarification, if you want to limit it, in this case, limit it to a certain number, again, just like we saw with the conditional formatting and the exact function, here I'm going to use the list function and say I am only going to take any one of these values within that field. I'm going to filter those values using the self, meaning whatever you put into the field, and because it is the values function, remember what I said, right values, left values, sort values, any of those values comes with this extra return. We don't want it. One of the tricks is you can use the get value, which just because it doesn't end in the word S for some reason, I guess, it removes or strips the return off for you. So by saying get value, only one value, the topmost value with no return, that is going to be what we allow, and it strips off that clear from the value list. These are the types of things that make your FileMaker solution, 1, work the way that you want, 2, prevent your users from entering incorrect data, which makes it easier on you or the client because you don't have to go in and fix data. You're simply not allowing anything that shouldn't be in there. And then 3, just makes it so clear, makes it so user-friendly to capture the data the way that you want. And then finally, down at the bottom, I just made a reset. And if you take a look at that script, it is just simply to replace field contents. And that's all it is. Dialog prompt, then you're just going to replace. For 2 hours of time, and what you can use this for now is this setup. You can copy and paste this and use anything that you've got in here into your solution. This can be used for any other type of ranking. Let's say it's a FileMaker database where you're ranking your mood on a daily basis. And each day you go in, you've got a little happy face, sad face, whatever. I've seen iOS applications like this. You can implement with these types of constraints, with the conditional formatting, with all of these different things, and this really nice graph, a great way to provide the user with visual feedback about the data that they're capturing and how it makes sense. So I hope this video has helped you out. It's inspired you a little bit more with regards to the things you can do within FileMaker. As always, I'd like to wish you much luck with your own FileMaker development, and until next time, happy FileMaking.
We hope you've enjoyed this video tutorial, and we'd like to say thank you for your subscription and your support. If you're not already a subscriber, head on over to www.filemakermagazine.com/subscribe for more information about the benefits of joining.